So, we're not quite done with Secrets of the Obscure yet, but something that I see coming up in the community is underwater content. Hello everyone, I'm Arali, and today I would like to present an idea for an expansion that I have that deals with going underwater. Since this current expansion has to do with going higher up into the sky, I figured it would be cool to be going in the opposite direction for a future expansion. So I've made a similar video a few years ago, but obviously we've had a number of revelations about things in the lore, namely the identity of the underwater dragon and who Mother is and so on, and we also had a change in how ArenaNet is delivering expansion content. Now I wanted to sit down and actually make a proper video on some ideas that I've had over the years concerning underwater content. This video is also much more structured than the last one, since that one was just me kind of talking to you guys about things relating to the lore of the underwater world of Guild Wars, and not talking about specific things like features and maps and so on. This time around, I will tackle not only the story and characters, but what features and rewards I could see being used. Obviously, this video might contain some spoilers as I will be talking about specific characters and events, and I want to let everyone know that this is all pure conjecture. I would love to hear what you guys think, so let me know in the comments down below. With all that out of the way, let's just get right into it. I want to start this concept by giving you guys an overlook of everything I could see being added in such an expansion. Not that it has any huge impact on the content, but a cool name that follows the new naming convention could be Menace of the Deep. There's a reason for this name in particular, but I'll get into that when I talk about the maps. Next up, I think the story would revolve around us going underwater, of course, and dealing with all things Quaggan, Largos, Leviathan, and that sort of stuff. This would be divided into 3 maps, with another hub city set as a midpoint outpost for the expansion. Features would include 2 new mounts, a fractal, underwater weapon revamp including a template and trade line, masteries that deal with the new mounts as well as other ways to traverse the depths, and new rewards. Of course, this time around we would finally get our legendary aqua breather with some cool effects, and more relics. I could perhaps see them tackling a rune rework here too. There would also be more swim speed infusion options, armors, weapons, and the regular stuff that comes with any expansion. I feel like that would be reasonable to expect out of ArenaNet considering what we have been seeing with Secrets of the Obscure. These would be split amongst the different releases, with a lot of them coming with the quarterly releases after the initial expansion release. Let's look at each different category in more detail. We start with the story. Of course, this could be taken a million different ways, but it would be nice to get more involved with the Largos. Perhaps Saya al-Rajid could make an appearance and ask for the commander's assistance in helping the Tetios houses as they're being attacked by something from the unending ocean and are desperate for help. This would set the precedence that this is not a world-ending event, but rather an isolated struggle with just the underwater races, and stakes don't need to be raised as high this time around. As we venture to help the Largos, we could find out more about the culture of the Largos, the Quaggan royal family, and what forces drives the Leviathans, and maybe deal with the Crate as well. ArenaNet was really good with not just answering very old lore thread questions in the Secrets of the Obscure, but also tying things together really well and expanding on the world. I would love to see the same for the underwater part of Guild Wars, since there are many unanswered questions and events here. The big bad of the expansion could be some ancient Largos, maybe the old leader of their civilization that was taken over by whatever darkness the Leviathans are part of. Consumed by this darkness, he has grown into this gigantic monster that could potentially be inspired by Cthulhu, something huge and scary and tentacly. Like I said earlier, this is just random stuff I came up with, but I feel it has potential to be very interesting, and I would love to hear what cool stories you guys could imagine for an underwater adventure. Next up are the maps. Obviously, with how the new mini expansions are presented, we would be getting 3 maps as well as 1 hub map. 2 maps with the initial release and 1 later that gets expanded with following releases. So let's get creative and think of some interesting ways of making these maps. Well, the first one I think would be fun to be a half and half map, meaning half on land and half in water. Having a cool beach type map to introduce us into this expansion would be really nice. Something like Labyrinthine Cliffs could work really well, since that map has some cool underwater spots. Also, starting an expansion with slowly going underwater and eventually venturing deeper and deeper into the depth of the ocean gives a sense of progression, like you're on a journey to a far-off place that needs your help. Some events that I could imagine here would be dealing with Quaggan refugees, helping them escape or preventing them from being captured by pirates or Crate or something along those lines. Naturally, some Largos could make an appearance, and we get hints as to what is attacking the Largos' homelands. There would also be a new adventure on the beach that is a race, but I will talk about that a little later on since it does involve the new Masteries and mounts. The underwater portion could have some destroyed Quaggan homes, and I don't think it would be important to have a meta event that ends in a big boss fight or anything, but it could be more like the war with the centaurs in Queensdale, where you help forces take back territory from the enemies, and it's a tug of war just to highlight that there is still a struggle going on. Overall, the map should not necessarily feel like disaster has struck, but only introduce us to the dangers that might wait ahead. That way, it doesn't feel like we're just going right back into the fight, but more like we're taking a journey to where the actual conflict is. The map wouldn't end with the hub map, but just transition to map 2. I somewhat dislike not being able to just move from the Skywatch Archipelago to Omnitas, but that I have to travel to the Wizard's Tower first. It's a little immersion breaking for me. This time around, the hub map would be in the corner of the second map, kind of like how Arborstone is located in the corner of Echovald. The second map would be completely submerged. I could see some crevices and underwater caves, lots of coral, and perhaps the darkness mechanic that we see in the underwater fractal, as well as Tangled Depths, could make a return, truly highlighting that we're journeying ever deeper into the ocean. At this point, we would encounter more and more of the forces of the deep. I'm thinking something dark, almost demonic-like, with tentacles. There would be a big meta event towards the deepest parts of the map where you fight a giant leviathan. The pre-events for this could include mustering different forces of the Quaggan and Largos, collecting certain items that can be used in the final fight, that sort of stuff. Other events could include eel-like enemies, like those in Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. They always creep me out, which would be fitting for this setting. We could encounter those in small passages and caves. Overall, I would want this map to feel like an underwater version of Auric Basin. Pretty much doing events in different corners of the map that deals with helping to set up a big meta event, while still letting the players explore and find all the secrets around. Now let's talk about the hub map. This would be the capital city of the Largos. As many others have mentioned, it would be really cool to have it in the fashion of the Gungan city from Star Wars Episode 1. These bubble-like structures that are all interconnected. Different bubbles for shops and houses and meeting halls and so on. Perhaps being able to actually see into the depth of the ocean would be really immersive. This is also where the name Menace of the Deep comes from, since Episode 1 of Star Wars is called the Phantom Menace. Just a little Easter egg of sorts. Obviously, this would be the place to find out all about the Largos and their culture. There could be libraries and things like that. Perhaps you could get some background to some of the Largos that we have actually seen in games so far, tying some of the lore together. Maybe even some friendly Krayt that want to team up with the Largos to fight against the forces of the deep. But overall, this would just be your regular hub map with all the different crafting stations and where we stop on our way before journeying back out to continue our fight. Lastly, for the third map that would come after the initial release. For the reason why we have to wait to actually get in there could be that the giant leviathan upon its death at the meta event creates an earthquake that causes rocks to block our path forward into the next map, and the Largos have to prepare some explosives in order to blow up the rubble and let us continue. Once we're inside, everything would be incredibly dark. Evil tentacle creatures and smaller leviathans would be roaming everywhere. The events here could bring back the old feeling of how we invaded Ore, chaining different events that have us capture camps and escort more soldiers in order to gain more ground against the enemy. The Masteries would come more into play now, but I will explain that when I actually talk about those. At the very depth of the map could be a constant whirlpool. The meta event involves us stopping this whirlpool that is flinging dark corruption everywhere. Once we stop the whirlpool, we find out that the big bad of this expansion is responsible for it, and he sits at the very center. We see that he's gigantic and the fight ensues. Perhaps some of the battle mechanics could involve us using light to weaken his darkness powers or something along those lines, while dozens of smaller leviathans keep attacking us. I'm not very good with thinking of different battle mechanics, but you get the gist. Overall, I just want the map to immediately give you an eerie feeling. I want people to be afraid to dive deeper into the new parts of the map. At the same time, I would love it if there were hidden caves with crystals and refracted light, perhaps some cool jumping puzzles, and more ancient lore and things from early on in Tierra's history. Maybe we could find Suwan's old lair, with some memory crystals that we can view, just like how Vlast had them in Path of Fire, once again expanding on the lore while also tying things together. So as you can see, these maps in concept would be pulling from other maps that have worked really well in the past. They also benefit from being able to be very vertical, which gives ArenaNet the ability to make a lot of stuff happen in these maps. I have always enjoyed how vast the underwater part of Frostgorge Sound feels. It's very immersive with the different Quaggan villages around, a huge trench with coral and all sorts of fish and enemies around. Having that same feeling for all those maps is pretty much what I would be going for here. Alright, now to the features. Obviously, here we can't demand too much, and I will try to keep it reasonable. First off, we have 2 new mounts, both of which would be underwater mounts, of course. Now, before everyone gets out their torches and pitchforks, let me explain where I'm coming from with this. So, why would I want underwater specific mounts? Well, we already have plenty of on-land and flying mounts, but as for underwater, the siege turtle is immensely disappointing, and I think the mechanic of movement underwater could be improved upon a lot. Okay, then how would you use these mounts to improve the movement, you might ask? The first mount that we would be introduced to is the dolphin mount. Think of this as the equivalent of a roller beetle just underwater. This would be a very speedy, hard to maneuver mount that would be useful for some racing. More on that later as well, but this gives you the chance to traverse through water very quickly in order to get to certain events and stuff like that. The other mount would be the seahorse, a very slow moving but easy to control mount. So even though the skimmer is available for underwater movement, it would serve as the middle of the road between the 2 new mounts. Obviously, the skimmer would be obtainable through this expansion, and the underwater mastery for it would be learned here as well. Maybe just like the Skyscale got for Secrets of the Obscure, the skimmer could get some extra abilities if the player has already unlocked the mastery for underwater swimming. I'll talk some more on the mounts when we get to Masteries. Next up would be the new fractal. I could perhaps see this being another underwater fractal that explores some of the events of the past, for example the destruction of the royal capital of the Quaggan, perhaps giving us deeper insight into what truly happened back then, since we do not have any info on this at all. This next feature is something I've talked about a lot before, and that is seeing a specific underwater trade line that deals with just underwater combat. And in conjunction with this, I would like to see a template slot added that only activates when you go underwater, which means that we can have a specific loadout just for our underwater combat situations. This would also help with the ever so stressful task of balancing combat, since having more tools to modify combat can help in alleviating the issue of just having skills to balance the combat. Some traits could even deal with swimming movement underwater and things of that nature. Obviously, this is an underwater expansion, but that doesn't mean everything has to focus on being just that. I would love to finally see the underwater weapons come on land. Like the Weapon Master we received for Secrets of the Obscure, someone in the Largo City could teach us the ways of using underwater weapons on land. This feature is perhaps the hardest I could see realized, since that is a lot of work and a lot of skills that need to be implemented, but it is something that the community has been asking for a long time, myself included. The last and most obvious one I feel like would be adding a legendary aqua breather, perhaps with different skins or color variants to unlock. Not exactly sure how this would look, so if you guys have any suggestions on that, let me know down below. Overall, I don't think this would be unreasonable for the scope of this expansion. I'd like to think that this all could be achieved, and I would be very happy if this is everything that was added for an underwater expansion. Of course, you could add a plethora of different things like underwater legendaries and so on, but like I said, I want to stay within reason. This next part is my most favorite, and I think some of you guys will agree with me on this. So what fun masteries have I thought of? Well, let's start with the mounts I've talked about earlier. The dolphin, being the roller beetle of the ocean, would be used for racing. How would this function? Well, imagine the beaver race from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, where you have to swim through rings. I mentioned this particular race because in that game, if you're transformed into Zora, you can actually jump out of the water mid-swim, like a dolphin. It would be cool to perhaps have a mastery that gives you a boost based on how well you jump, just like the roller beetle gives you endurance for well done drifting. There could also be mastery that gives you speed every time you go through one of the circles. Pretty much just some masteries to make it a fun little way of traversing the water. Perhaps one last mastery for the dolphin could be something that deals with entering caves. Once again, this is obviously another homage to the roller beetle that lets you crash through walls if you're speedy enough. So maybe not crash through walls, but perhaps like a magical barrier or something that is erected to keep people out. Next is the seahorse mount. I said earlier that this would be the slow mount. Think of it as the sky scale of the ocean. Comparatively to the skimmer, the seahorse would be able to turn on a dime and be able to swiftly travel up and down in the ocean. The reason for this would be the masteries. Here, we get something akin to a sonar ability that lets you search for hidden treasure on the ocean floor. I realized that based on the name, this would fit much better with the dolphin mount, but it could be something that is able to be learned by all underwater mounts. Back to the treasure chests though, these would be like the chests we find in Drytop during the sandstorm that require a key. I find the treasure chests from Path of Fire to be very tedious and super unfun. I'd rather have the ability to just venture around on the bottom of the ocean and search for treasure rather than chase halfway across the map in order to get to one. This ability could perhaps be used for finding hidden entrances like illusionary walls to enter caves or identify cloaked opponents. Pretty much exactly what we see in the underwater fractal when you're transformed into a dolphin. I can see some achievements utilize this ability as well. One other mastery I could think of is dealing with the darkness in the deep ocean. I did mention the darkness mechanic in some of the underwater sections of Guild Wars 2, where you have to collect the bioluminescent plants and use those to traverse the dark areas. How about making this a mastery, where you get a special action key for those areas, and the more of the mastery that you have learned, the longer this will persist, and perhaps even get brighter, giving you the ability to see more of your surroundings. This mastery is a callback to things like the Poison Mastery from Heart of Thorns. I remember the developers talking about how a lot of the Heart of Thorns masteries were inspired by Metroidvania games, and I really like this idea. I find many masteries to be superfluous if you're not doing whatever specific thing they interact with. So how do we fix this for future masteries such as this? Well, ArenaNet could add caves to existing water in the world that requires you to have this mastery unlocked, perhaps enticing new people to purchase the expansion in order to get into these new caves. This might be a little bit more work, but I think it could pay off in expanding on existing underwater content. Now for the last mastery line, and I think this would be the most important and impactful one. This line would have to do with being able to walk on the bottom of the ocean. It seems like a more simple solution to the issue that some people have with underwater combat. I know not everyone enjoys having to battle in the water, so giving us the ability to walk on the ocean floor would be really cool. This could be taught by the Largos. Obviously, being underwater, at first we're very slow, but then as we progress through the mastery line, we get faster and faster, and maybe even learn to jump without getting back to swimming, letting us traverse the ocean depths even more. I think it would be fun to go exploring in some ancient ruins and having events that require you to carry things as you walk the ocean floor. Overall, I tried to balance these masteries in ways where I think they would be both enjoyable and also doable for ArenaNet. Let me know of some other cool masteries you could imagine us having when talking about going underwater for a future expansion. Now to wind down, I suppose, this last part I want to leave somewhat open-ended and get your guys' opinion on what you think we could see for rewards. I do have a couple of ideas, obviously the legendary Aqua Breather being one of them. I could see some variants on it as well, perhaps some different effects. We could also see something with the swim speed infusions. Maybe those could be like the other infusions where we start to see regular combat stats added to them in some way. Obviously the Wizard's Vault could be updated with some exclusive mount skins for the Dolphin and the Seahorse. It would also be cool to include other sources of water in the world of Guild Wars. Perhaps have a collection in the achievements that has you travel to all the Quaggan villages in Guild Wars in order to get some Quaggan themed weapons and armors. Something along those lines. I feel like this would be a great opportunity to add some more water themed weapons and armors overall too. The Sea Dragon armor is really cool and has a nice iridescent effect on it like fish scales. Imagine a cloth armor like set with that added effect. That would be really unique, I think. Lastly, we could get a new set of relics. Something that deals with underwater combat once again would be nice. I know they got rid of summons like the Golem and the Parrot, but wouldn't it be cool to summon your very own Quaggan warrior to help in combat? Anyways, let me know what cool stuff you would want to be able to get. That pretty much wraps up this concept video. Some of you might ask why I would make a video like this. I think it goes into the whole discussion of having constructive criticism of the game and the developers. If we voice what things we would like to see in the future and we keep it in the realm of being reasonable and doable, perhaps ArenaNet will listen or at least feel inspired by what stuff we have come up with. I'm sure there are many instances of developers getting inspired by great ideas that came from players, or at least this is my hope. Now, I will say that depending on how well this video does, I do plan on perhaps making more of these concept videos for other expansions. So let me know what you think and make sure to subscribe and share this with your friends. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!